Finally, we get an inside look at one of these Russian turtle tanks, a modern of Marvel engineering that's been popping up all over the Ukrainian battlefield for a little while now. Now, recently, Ukrainian forces managed to capture one of those, and we'll talk about how that happened in a second, and just released a video showing the inner workings of one of these beasts. So, without further ado, let's dive on in. I'm going to read through the subtitles as they go for anyone who's primarily listening, doesn't want to read along. They say, here you go, the captured Russian turtle tank. Allegedly almost protected from all types of drone attacks, but ironically, it was the drones that hunted it down. First, a drone drop immobilized it, and then FPV drones finished the job. Let's examine this marvel of modern Russian engineering in detail. Fragments all throughout, bullet holes. You'll see why that's important here in a second. As you can see, the driver has almost no visibility. The tank's turret is fixed in place. There's no ammunition, and the main gun doesn't even shoot. So they're going to get into this here in a second, but it's essentially troop transport is the only purpose this is serving. If the gun can't shoot, the turret is fixed in place. That kind of removes it from being a tank, really, at all, right? They say this is a Russian T-62M manufactured in the 1960s, so an older version, without reactive armor, without ammunition, used simply as a personnel transport. They say the barn crew is captured with the vehicle, commander, and a driver. Some videos here of them actually capturing it. The reactive armor blocks are empty. Ammunition is absent. The gun is disabled. The turret is locked in place. The tank is but a taxi cab. The main protection is supposed to come from electronic countermeasure devices. There's a whole garland of them on top. We have removed them for detailed study. So there you have it. The SAR tank is just an empty box for taxiing infantry under electronic countermeasure protection. Now, quick note on that, they're going to get into some of the armor here, but if you're just using this to taxi infantry from one place to the next, it seems like there's other options than this, right? So Russia certainly has a lot of tanks in storage that could be used in this capacity, but the armor that they're stacking on the side of this stuff isn't really armor. The primary defensive mechanism here is the electronic countermeasures that they have on top of the vehicle. I don't understand why you have to create a new, less armored vehicle to do that when you could just layer these on top of a standard infantry fighting vehicle or armored personnel carrier and at least provide some degree of protection from the sides. They say the side skirts may protect the infantry from small fragments, but the principal means of protection is the electronic countermeasure, which disrupts attacking drones. If a drone makes it through, though, this tin won't save you. But the main drawback of this design is that the tank inside loses its firepower. It can either turn the turret nor fire. We've gone over that a few times now. Therefore, it can only be used as transport. Besides, this is not armor. This is sheet metal. This was cannibalized from an electrical junction box. You can see that right there. They scavenged scrap metal and welded it together. The ECM was put on top, but there were no video cameras, thus no way to look around. All the driver can see is what's in front of his vision block. So how do we bring this beast down? Before getting into how the drones disabled this vehicle, which is interesting, again, to highlight that it's hard to understand the exact purpose of this, right? It seems like, of course, the number one priority that Russia went after in the creation of this thing was trying to minimize the drone threat, given that the primary means of protection that this thing has are the electronic countermeasures posted on top. Of course, they seem to have failed in a degree, and we have the video they already showed in this clip of the drones dropping grenades overhead, and we're going to get into here in a second how they were able to disable this vehicle from a drone and then strike it with FPVs. But again, on the battlefield, there's a lot of other weapon systems at play, especially the modern battlefield between Ukraine and Russia. It's not just drones, right? As soon as this vehicle comes within a few kilometers of the front lines, they're going to be targeted by anti-tank guided missiles, high caliber or large caliber rounds from things like Bradleys, maybe BMPs and others that, from what it looks like, would have no issue piercing this thin metal layer that they've layered on top. So technically, I guess you couldn't see the infantry in there, but the majority of weapon systems, or a lot of weapon systems that Ukraine has in their disposal, is going to go through this thing like a knife through butter. They say it was immobilized by dropping a charge from a drone drop. The explosion took out this rubber element from the roller, and the track likely tangled, causing the tank to stop. Once the roller was damaged and the turtle had stopped, we hammered it with FPV drones, so it must have taken out the electronic countermeasures as well. Let's climb inside and take a look at the creature comforts. Yeah, kind of a makeshift metal door there. This is what the livestock holding pen looks like. They appear to have lived here. Sleeping bags, canned food, water. As you can see, the turret has no dynamic protection. Ordinary T-62 knob turret. The loader's hatch is welded shut, with only the tank commander in the turret. The only new hardware on this 1960s tank were the radio station with a modern antenna, and the ECM devices on top, electronic countermeasures. By the way, check out how the electronic countermeasures are wired. This is a field telephone cable from the TA-57, the Stalin-era field telephone. So pretty basic wiring there. Now, a note on the loader's hatch being welded shut. If you're not going to use this as a tank, you don't need a full tank crew, right? So it makes sense that this was maybe something set aside specifically for this purpose. It does not look like they're planning on using this as a tank at all. So why not weld certain areas shut and just kind of outfit it specifically for this mission set that they're using it for? They say there are no external observation devices. The tank commander inside is completely blind. Only the driver has some limited forward vision. On the bright side, even I can fit into a 1960s tank. There's no autoloader, so it must have more space inside. I don't know about that, man. I wouldn't like squeezing down into a space that tight. A normal tank, fine, but if you're that tight in the hatch, I'm not sure I'm going all the way down in. Yep, quite more spacious than the T-72. But what's the point if you're blind as a bat? And he rotates back and forth. He says you can't see jack from the commander's position. Let's have a chat with the Ukrainian tank driver who had the pleasure of driving this rusty shed to the filming location. Before getting into that, I want to go back to the look at the commanders not being able to see anything. What's interesting here is this is a war that we've seen so much technological innovation. We have drones everywhere, right? Eyes on the battlefield from all different perspectives. It's notable that Russia didn't mount any sort of external camera on this. Maybe they're being guided by drones overhead, but again, they've mounted so many electronic countermeasures that it's possible that one of the challenges in this war is a lot of times we've seen the Russian ECMs either on or off, to where if they're on, they're possibly jamming Russian drones as well. So that's, of course, a risk, trying to use a drone to overhead to try to guide this turtle tank. But even mounting some sort of camera hardwired on the outside of the vehicle seems like it'd be an easy solution to be able to give the driver inside a little better visibility as to where he's going. Because, again, from what they highlight here, it looks like the driver's field of vision is essentially a small box straight forward. Then they move into the tank commander who drove this thing over. He said, "How did this T-62 fare on the road? Is it an old bucket of junk, or does it have something going for it?" He said, "The barn makes a terrible clatter when on the move. I can imagine. Loaded down with all that extra metal. So there's no way to sneak up anywhere quietly." Yeah. "The engine is old and emits large billows of smoke. The thing is clapped out. This hardware needs to be retired, not pressed into active service. And yet the engine is starting, the thing is rolling. Does the reverse gear work? Yes, the gears are working. You can shift through all from first to the last. But you must use considerable force. How's the visibility from the driver's position? The driver only sees forward. We were just talking about a second. It's better if you open the hatch and stick your head out. But if you hide inside, you can only see a narrow cone forward. This tells me that someone else had to sit outside the hatch and guide him, because there's no radio inside the tank. Oh, interesting. So someone had to sit outside and tell the driver where to go. I'm going to go back to one of the fields of view here. So what they're saying is that, see if we can find a good spot where it shows the inside look. Now we'll go to the outside view here up front. So even somebody sitting out front, looking ahead, very limited visibility as to where the driver can go. Now, they did mention that the driver might just stand outside of the turret, right? That is an option to have that hatch open. Most tanks, I'm not super familiar with the T-62, but most tanks, you can pop open that hatch and drive while looking out in an environment where you're not having to deal with small arms fire or other threats. That could be a possibility here, right? They think they're protected from most threats, especially the drones. You got to think that driver's popping his head out and driving that way. But even then, look at the field of vision he has. It's very, very limited in front. I thought that was interesting as well that they said there's no radio inside. Seems odd at this point to be sending troops forward to the front in any war without some means of communication. I wonder if the troops on top maybe had that communication that was linked back to the rear. Now, they get into this in a second. They captured the soldiers, so who knows, maybe they destroyed the radio, but it doesn't sound like they had one in there. Say the Russian barn is advertised as being impervious to our drone attacks, and yet it was precisely our drones that brought it down. This damage from his FPV drone strike, first-person view. To recap, he goes over everything here. The turret is locked in place, and the gun does not operate. The main protection comes from ECMs. The commander is the only one with a radio station. Okay, so there's a radio. Blind, loud, and stupid. Captured and brought to you by the 26th Mechanized Brigade Armed Forces of Ukraine. Okay, a couple key observations from my perspective. Again, this doesn't make a lot of sense. I think when we saw these originally, there was an expectation that this armor on the outside was more than it actually is. This is nothing. Again, small arms aren't necessarily going to go through it. Blast fragments will. You saw the FPV drone had no issue, and if this thing comes across a Bradley, it's just going to chew through that top like it's not even there. So that's interesting. Definitely expected more armor up top. It's not a tank at all. It has a turret, it has a barrel, but this is no longer a tank because it can't fire. It doesn't look like it had any weapon systems mounted on board. It is exclusively a troop carrier. So it's interesting to me that they went with this version, kind of building something new, again, rather than using some of the existing armored personnel carriers that they have in their inventory. I mean, Russia has lost a lot of equipment throughout this war, but not so much to where they don't have any APCs remaining at all. And the infantry on board here really are masked. You can't see them as they're approaching. But this, as the driver mentioned, this turtle tank isn't sneaking up on anyone. So a lot of people are going to see it approaching. It's not really, doesn't really matter all that much if the infantry are not visible on top. They're still going to come under attack by Ukrainian armed forces. And then the last thing is that clearly the number one most important, beyond everything else, concern are the drone attacks. I think that's notable, right? For all of the weapons on the modern battlefield, we're seeing new innovations, if you will, if you can call this a new innovation, an adaptation, maybe specifically designed to counter that threat. So much so that they're taking the gun out of commission, that they're not layering extra armor that's going to protect against, again, Bradley ammunition, anti-tank rounds, things like that, as well as anti-tank guided munitions. Those are just going to, anti-tank guided missiles, those are going to chew right through this like it's not even there. So a noticeable change in kind of the priority of what to defend against. But I'll put a link to this full video in the description below if you want to check it out in its entirety without me talking and adding anything to it. That's all we got for now. Of course, if you're interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, which is also linked in the description below. Recently had an article talking about kind of the background of why Russia went to Cuba with their Navy, what that means for the future of U.S.-Russia relations. We've got podcasts, ad-free videos, and 3 articles coming out each week on a variety of subjects around the world. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.